Hello, everybody. So, today I wanted to talk about The Killers of the Flower Moon, which is the Martin Scorsese film, and a little bit about Oppenheimer. I don't know why, but I kind of associate these films together. I think they're both super long, they're both super artistic. They're both very famous directors. I just feel like these two can kind of be compared and contrasted a little bit. So I want to start with the Killers of the Flower Moon. Um, I'm gonna try not to do any spoilers in this. Okay, if you haven't seen it yet, which you might not have, probably both of these are mostly going to be consumed not in theaters but in um, on physical media or streaming. I would assume one or the other. I imagine because of their length, and it's in America it's getting cold, so I think that a lot of this stuff is going to be consumed not in theaters. But Killers of the Flower Moon I thought was excellent. We went and saw it. It's like 4 hours long. It is seriously long, and it didn't feel like that. I wasn't like, oh my gosh, we have to watch this again, or how can this keep going? I did not feel that way. It was really well paced and well put together. It's not a perfect film. There's a couple little things that I'll talk about, but it is really, really good. I always get a giant drink when I go to the theater, and unfortunately, that did not work with a 4 hour film. Very rarely do I get up and run to the bathroom real quick during a movie, but I had to during this one. And it wasn't because I was bored at all. It was just because I had to go to the bathroom so bad because I drank my huge drink. So do be careful. If you are going to the theater, beware. It's 4 hours long. There's not an intermission or anything like that. It's just 4 hours long. But it was incredible. It was beautiful to look at. The cinematography was amazing. The acting was good. I'm not the biggest fan of Leonardo DiCaprio. I love Martin Scorsese, but I'm not the biggest fan of Leonardo. I loved The Wolf of Wall Street. That scene where he takes those drugs and he's talking on the payphone, and suddenly the drugs kick in, and he tries to get in his car, and I mean, it is insanity. It's so good, and I feel like that role really fit Leonardo DiCaprio. I feel like it really worked for him. Because it wasn't much of a stretch, and I'm not saying he's an evil person or anything crazy like that. I just feel like he got to kind of be himself a little bit, and it really worked. He was great in that movie, really great. This film, I felt like a lot of the performances were just a tiny bit flat. I feel like it was trying to be so natural that there were key moments that helped the story that weren't really nailed. There's a moment where the main character and his uncle are sitting and talking, and there's this rough transition in the writing. They're going from one beat to another beat, where his uncle is pointing down at a person who's passed out from alcohol. I'm trying not to ruin things. This is tiny. This is nothing, okay? And he says, that person used to be married to your wife. And he's like, that person was married to my wife? And then he has to, this transition is happening for Robert De Niro, where then he has to say, are you doing okay? Because you seem a little bit tense to me. And he says, this guy was married to my wife? And then he's got this other transition where he has to say, let her have her secrets because you have your secrets. And those three moments are such a big shift. And I really wanted to see Robert De Niro go from kind of playful, caring, to you need to get your shit together or you're going to ruin this entire thing. And I really wanted to see that shift. And it was fast, granted, but Robert De Niro can handle that. That's not a thing. Martin Scorsese can handle that. But everything was so natural and just conversational that it just kind of blew through it, you know? And that's super critical. Like the fact that this movie didn't feel long means that they probably were doing the right thing by keeping it natural and by not pounding in these story moments and really conveying this plot. You know, it was just wonderful to watch. It really was. And I do feel like that kind of hurt the performances a tiny bit. I feel like Leonardo DiCaprio was kind of doing his best Sling Blade, to be perfectly honest. And that's, once again, super picky, right? Super critical. He's great in the movie. He's just fine. But I do feel like he was kind of layering something on just to really kind of stick out from stuff he'd done in the past, you know, and to kind of say I can be a character actor, and I'm not sure. I'm not positive that he can be a character actor. You know, he carried the movie. He's a great leading man, you know, but I don't know about the character stuff. But all that is super picky. It's a wonderful film. It's beautiful to watch. All the acting was just fine. And there's a lot of great people in there. Even Brendan Fraser was in the film. I loved to see him as the lawyer. I was like, oh man, Brendan Fraser, you know, because you don't see him very often. And I know with The Whale, he kind of brought himself back into the limelight, which I think is great. I think it's wonderful. But it's a really fantastic film. If you haven't seen it, try to see it. And try to see it in the theater. Because there's a really neat thing. In the beginning, Martin Scorsese comes on, not in the movie. He just comes on as the director and he says, thank you for seeing this film in the theater. And it's kind of neat to see him do that, and then you go into the film. And then there's a nice tie-in at the end. And I don't know how that's going to work on home video or streaming. I'm interested to see if he re-records that and just says, thank you for seeing this movie. Because I like the way it tied in with the ending of the film. So hopefully he does something, because I don't think it's appropriate for him to say thank you for seeing this film in the theater when you're streaming it on your couch. You know what I mean? So he'd have to kind of re-record it. And maybe he made a few recordings. I hope he did, because it was neat to see kind of those bookends. I don't want to ruin anything, but there's kind of bookends on it in the theater. And we'll see how that translates. And it may not be a problem, even if he doesn't. But I can't go too much into that because I don't want to do spoilers. So now for Oppenheimer, it was nice to look at. I mean, this is my first huge problem. So he filmed it for IMAX, and I mean for true IMAX. Like the frames on that film are like this big, right? That's one frame, and it's flying by. They're huge, and they're in odd shape, right? But I don't want to get into that right this second. So he filmed the whole thing for IMAX, but there's literally only like 8 IMAX theaters in the United States. Like there's none. And I know there's a million theaters that call themselves IMAX, but they're all digital, right? All they're doing is taking the movie, squishing it down so that it'll fit out of their little laser projector, and they're shooting it on a pretty big screen, right? They're not IMAX. If you want to see this film the way Christopher Nolan intended, I guess first you'd need a time machine because it's gone, right? You can't go see Oppenheimer in IMAX theaters. I don't believe. I can't really say because we don't have one. I have no idea what actual IMAX theaters are doing because they don't exist. If you're not wealthy, you can't go see Oppenheimer the way the director intended it, which is weird. It's like theater all of a sudden, right? Like if you want to go see the latest play on Broadway, you got to fly to New York. You got to go to Broadway. You got to pay the money. No. Like, I don't know. That just struck me as wrong from the get-go. And then you start to wonder, when this streams, is it going to be square? Are you going to have black bars on either side of your television the whole time? Which, I mean, that's just odd, you know? And I know, because back in the 80s when we had square televisions, I lived through when they started letterboxing movies. And I was happy about it, personally, because they didn't cut the sides off, right? What they did is they put black bars on the top and the bottom so they got the actual shape of the film so you could see the whole picture. But for the average person, all that did is made your TV smaller, right? And people don't want smaller TVs. They want bigger TVs. And that's why I was so thrilled when TVs started changing their shape to match movie theaters. It's incredible. Because now, if you've got a big old TV, you know, because you went out on Black Friday to Best Buy or whatever, got yourself a big old TV, you can see what the director intended as big as your TV, which is fantastic. But now, if he goes the opposite direction and puts black bars on the side so that it can truly show everything, I feel like that's this weird step backwards, which I don't know that I agree with. It's being converted to digital because most people will just stream it. Low quality digital, honestly. But if you go and buy the 4K disc, first off, it is being scaled down, you know, because you can't fit that type of film on a 4K disc. That is not going to happen. So they're scaling it down so that it fits on the disc. And then, are they going to cut off the top and the bottom so that it fits on your TV? Because I don't want that. I hope that when he was looking through and composing his shots, he was using all of this so he can't cut off the top and the bottom, so we're getting black bars. I don't know. It's strange. So that's my first thing about it. It's made for rich people to enjoy. Bizarre. And then it opens. I feel like there was something I was going to talk about, but I passed up. No, we'll just go on with it opens, and it's got this little subtitle. It says, I think it says, Fission. And I'm like, oh, okay. So we're going to get these little chapters as we watch this film. Because, of course, rule number 1 in film school is, if you establish something in the beginning, keep it up. You know, don't just forget about it. And then literally, like 4 seconds later, one edit, I swear, it says fusion. And it never happens again for the entire film. Now, I've only seen it once, right? And I went and saw it in a supposed IMAX theater. Maybe they were cutting the bottom off and he was... I do not even know. But to me, that is like college level mistake. Like, that's terrible. as we were walking out, my buddy was like, I was tracking that. I was waiting. I was looking for more. Because why would you start that and then just not bother? You know, and I kind of felt that way through a lot of the film. I felt like he was so obsessed with this crazy film stock thing that he was doing that nobody would get to see, that he sort of lost sight of other things, you know. And I do have to say, I kind of like Christopher Nolan. Okay, I don't want to. I love that he's a champion for physical media. I love that. I love that he kind of has a Twilight Zone brain, that he wants to trick you. Memento is a great, great movie. The Prestige is pretty dang good. If you haven't seen these movies, you should check them out because they're cool, right? Batman's okay, right? It's Batman, right? It's Batman. If it's not Michael Keaton, for me, because I'm old, if it's not Michael Keaton, it's not really Batman. But that's a whole other thing. But that's okay. It's all right. I wasn't a big fan of. I haven't seen all his films, but the ones I have seen, I wasn't a big fan of Inception because it was too long. It was way too long. And this is a big Twilight Zone thing for me, to be perfectly honest. So for me, and I know that if I was alive back in the 50s, this narrative would be slightly different. But for me, at my age, everything kind of started with The Outer Limits. And then The Twilight Zone came out, kind of right after, maybe even a little bit during, but The Outer Limits don't stand a chance against The Twilight Zone, even though they're just as good, honestly. But the problem is The Outer Limits are an hour long each. Now, they had commercials, so they were probably really like 47 minutes or something like that. Twilight Zones were a half an hour each, which made them really like 24 minutes or something like that. And nobody talks about The Outer Limits, and everybody talks about The Twilight Zone. And the reason is because of the length. We have all The Outer Limits. I bought the set, and my wife and I were like, we're going to watch an Outer Limits each night before we go to bed. And I swear, we'd get 30 minutes in and fall asleep. Every single time. Because the padding that you have to do to get to your little fancy Twilight Zone ending is a mess. It's horrible to watch. But the Twilight Zone, 24 minutes, bam, it goes down in history, right? It's incredibly successful because that is the perfect length. And all Inception is the idea of, is he dreaming? That's it. That's the whole point, right? And you've got that little top spin at the end, and then you don't get to see if it stops or not, right? That's the whole point. And it did not earn that length. No way. I know there's fancy stuff with the room turning so that they have to walk on the walls. Camera turns with it so it looks like, whatever. I get it. We've all seen Singing in the Rain. But it did not earn that. It did not earn that at all. The van falling into the water. No, absolutely not. And then Inception, no. What's the space one? Interstellar, right? And it had its moment. And this is another example. I love that in that film, society is a disaster because they gave up on science. That's a wonderful message, right? We don't want to give up on science. We like science. We don't want our society to crumble and go back to the Dark Ages because some idiot tells us science is wrong. We don't want that at all. And I love that that's kind of the message, at least for the beginning of the film. I really enjoyed that. And I appreciate that from Christopher Nolan. But dang, it's long. I like the goofy robots. I like the weird planet with the wave because the gravity was so strong from outside that it was pulling that water up and creating this constant tide that was basically a tidal wave over the entire planet. Wonderful. Those are cool. But then you get to the black hole. And, of course they should have been killed instantly, but they weren't because, and I hope I'm remembering this correctly, it's not a black hole, right? It's a thing that the aliens or future humans or something created to send a message, I guess, which is just kind of dumb. Why don't you just send the message? I mean, talk about elaborate. That's insane, right? Wow, no, that is not the way you solve problems. That's not it. But it's okay, right? It wasn't bad. There was a couple fun. The robots were fun. I like seeing Michael Caine. I like Michael Caine, and Christopher Nolan has used him a few times. I like that. Tenet, no. I mean, it's just way too long. I mean, it's weird because I got, an hour into the film and I was like, oh my God, this is horrible. And then that car started coming backwards down the freeway. And I was like, oh, the movie is starting, right? That was shocking. It was so cool. And then that's over. And you got another hour at least. No, it's just not. I mean, if he wants to make the Twilight Zone, he should make the Twilight Zone. He'd be good at it, right? Him and M. Night Shyamalan get together, start making Twilight Zone episodes. Talk about a successful television show. They could do 10 seasons of that stuff together. Seriously. Get some of the people that are actually working on the Twilight Zone, because there's some successful parts about the Twilight Zone. I don't think I'll ever make a video about it, so just real quick, I'm going to say their themes are kind of messed up. I hate to say it. There's the monster on the wing of the plane, so they've got this vet who doesn't dare to go outside, and I'm oversimplifying this, okay? It's been forever since I've watched it. But they got this vet who finally dares to go outside. He gets on a plane and he loses his shit, right? He can't handle it. And the plane ends up going down because he loses his shit. And then they're stranded on an island and everybody hates him, so they kill him. That's a terrible story. That's terrible. And I guess it's shocking, I guess. You're like, oh, the Twilight Zone. But there's no monster on the wing of the plane. I mean, and this is stupid, right? But the obvious pitch, I hate to say it, but the obvious pitch is the monster on the wing of the plane is his platoon, right? It's the people who died under his command, or whatever. He's a vet. I'm not sure. I think he's actually a photographer, so he gets PTSD just from being there. But it could be the people that he photographed, right? And over time he begins to realize that it's not his fault. There's your basic pitch, right? That's a good story, not you kill him in the end because he ruined your vacation or whatever, right? I mean, that's just trashy, right? And there's a couple more examples. There's one where a meteor goes over and all the men turn into total douchebags, like manly bullshit trash, and they just destroy everything. And the women are trying to hide because they're just douchebags, right? And then you find one man who didn't go crazy, and they ask him in the end, why didn't you go crazy? And he said, because I didn't want to. I didn't feel like it was the right thing to do. That's brilliant. It's brilliant. But then, the whole time when you're watching it, but he's gay. And to give the average jock a way out that easily by just saying, well, yeah, he's a woman, right? Because that's probably what the average jock would think, which is completely wrong, but it gives them a way out, right? To blunt your message like that without just being able to say, men should quit being such douchebags, right? If you don't have the balls to say that, then don't say it. Don't give them a way out, you know? And you can argue, there's so many levels that you can go into and say, of course, gay men aren't women. Of course, I know that. The average idiot douchebag jock probably doesn't know that, right? They're just going to assume that. Right, and you can also say, but there were other gay men in the story that did go crazy, which is completely true. I get all of that, but why would you give the person you're trying to educate? Why would you give them a way out like that? It's a poor choice. There's another one where there's a camera that they can watch. I'm trying to remember the. When it's on, they back up or something like that. Somehow they can see different outcomes. It's a little bit like Groundhog Day. They kind of relive, but it's not the exact same moment. It's not the same day. They're on this journey and they're taking different paths, and they have to choose the right path in order to reach their journey. And their obstacle is racism, like the literal physical embodiment. This white cop guy is their obstacle in their way every time, right? And it turns out that the mother, and they're all black characters except for the cop, right? The mother of the person who's trying to take their son to college has kind of given up on their family. They've kind of pulled away from their heritage and their culture. And I'm going to sum this up in weird ways because I don't know exactly how to put it. But she basically becomes white. And the story kind of suggests that the racism that she's running into is because of that. Because the only true path to getting her son safely to college is if she reunites with her family and her heritage, which sort of suggests that the racism that she's facing is her fault, which again is kind of crazy. I don't know. I love the Twilight Zone. And I really wanted to love the new Twilight Zone, you know. And I'm a pretty liberal person. I'm just fine with it being really eclectic. I'm just fine with them having all kinds of different voices in the writer's room. I got no problem with that at all. But it turned out that it was so... The themes were so crazy. I don't know. It's weird. It's really weird. But wow, that was a crazy tangent. I'm sorry. I just knew that I probably wouldn't make a video about the Twilight Zone, so I wanted to get that in there. And maybe that's wrong. Maybe I should edit this out and do a video about the Twilight Zone, but I think I'm just going to try this. We'll see how it goes. Anyway, back to Christopher Nolan. It's too long. It's way too long. And then he does this crazy thing in the middle of Oppenheimer where he detonates the bomb in the middle. Right? The entire ad campaign is building to seeing this explosion in IMAX if you're rich enough. And then he makes it not the point of the movie. Yeah, no, that works. That totally works. But it's halfway through. He's still got this whole other thing he's got to do, which was just a terrible mistake because all it does is make the film seem long. Okay, and I want to make that clear. It's okay artistically that he would say, "My movie's not about the bomb. My movie's about the person and his entire life." There's nothing wrong with that, but then you can't build up to that moment so dramatically within the film and within the advertising and then expect people to sit there for another hour. If your goal was truly to talk about his life, he did it wrong. He did it wrong, and it made it feel really long. It's such a long movie. And the actors are amazing. I'll tell you, the acting in this movie is much better, I feel, and this is not the actors' faults. I feel the acting is kind of better in Oppenheimer than it is in Killers of the Flower Moon because they were being so natural and, just moving through. And it honestly made the artistic choices that Martin Scorsese made kind of stick out a little bit. There's a point in the film where there's a fire going on and people are kind of cultivating the fire or maybe trying to look like they're putting it out. I'm not sure because it got confusing because it was like this fire ballet. Like they're doing these strange movements within the fire, and it really stuck out. I'm not sure if he wanted it to be more subtle so that it was just a feeling that you got while you watched it, or if he really wanted it to be this bold artistic choice. And if that's the case, then maybe he should have been a little more artistic at other moments, But back to Oppenheimer. Yeah, it was just way too long. And he had this weird, silly twist where Albert Einstein gave Oppenheimer some advice, but you don't know what the advice is. You don't learn till the end that Oppenheimer's advice was when they pray. Or sorry, that Albert Einstein's advice was when they praise you, when they give you awards, they're only doing that for themselves. They're not doing that for you. Which I guess is... I feel like most everything humans do, they do for themselves. Right? I don't know how incredibly mind-blowing that advice is. I don't know why it came from Albert Einstein. I think Albert Einstein was pretty much loved from the beginning, I don't know. It didn't make a lot of sense. The acting was great, though. I'm going to try to remember his name. I love this actor. The guy who plays the president in Oppenheimer, you can't even tell it's him. I mean, he's so good. And he's literally in it for 45 seconds. It's this tiny scene. And he is amazing. He's in Rosencrantz and Guildenstern Are Dead. I'm trying to think. What else? Tim Roth. I think it's Tim Roth. He's great. He's great in the movie. There's this crazy sex scene in the middle. Well, it's not in the middle. It's kind of more towards the beginning where he has to say, I am become death, or whatever his famous quote is, because he read it. It's so pretentious. It's so weird. All the women in the movie are just weird. And it's possible that Christopher Nolan was basing it on some kind of memoirs that Oppenheimer wrote. So he was just showing Oppenheimer's point of view of women. But I don't know. I don't know. The women were just weird. There was no kind of baseline where you could say, okay, there's some normal humans, and these guys are crazy. You know, there was no. They were just all crazy. I don't know. I don't know. It was not a great film at all. But um, Killers of the Flower Moon is a great movie, and you absolutely should see it when you get the chance. You know, it is 4 hours, which is rough. But the neat thing is, you can break it up over a few nights. We're used to that, you know, or you can binge it all at once, whatever you like. It's really good. It's really good, and definitely worth seeing. Oppenheimer, you can skip, you know, or you can fast forward through it. Just get to the parts that look interesting. But it's really not worth it. I hate to say it, because I appreciate Christopher Nolan, but no. Okay, that's all. That was super long. I'm sorry. Have a great night.